Joining us now is Joe Boland, who is the Vice President of Mission for Catholic Extension. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Recently, you were making a presentation at the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops about the ravaged areas of the hurricane, the places that you, Catholic Extension, works in. Maybe if you could tell us a little bit about that, what you presented to the bishops.
Yeah, we gathered 3 bishops together from the hurricane-ravaged dioceses. It was Bishop Curtis Guillory of Beaumont and Bishop Bavard of the Virgin Islands and Archbishop Gonzalez of San Juan, Puerto Rico. And it was a really great moment to bring these bishops together to talk about some of the impact that they've seen in their dioceses and to understand how these hurricanes have really impacted not just the life of the church, but society as a whole. So it was a great moment just to kind of raise awareness, especially now as some of these stories begin to fade from the news. We at Catholic Extension want to make sure that these stories stay front and center.
Yeah, and you've heard some of these stories too. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about exactly what kind of devastation these places are facing.
Yeah, the stories are just absolutely incredible that we're getting. I had the opportunity to be in Beaumont, Texas, just very recently, and I visited a parish where they told me that when the floodwaters were coming, of course this was Hurricane Harvey that had hit the Diocese of Beaumont, particularly Port Arthur. And the floodwaters were coming in, 64 inches of rain, the highest amount of recorded rainfall in the history of the United States. And there was a priest who had nowhere else to go. He was in kind of this abandoned neighborhood, and he crawled up and he sat on top of the altar as the floodwaters were rising and waited for the boats to come and rescue him, which thankfully they did. In Puerto Rico, in the Diocese of Ponce, we work with all 6 of the dioceses in the island of Puerto Rico. And in the immediate aftermath of the storm, we had sent in just funding for these dioceses to be able to operate and do the basic work of the church because, of course, there's no income coming in. No one can work. No one's getting a paycheck. And so many people are already turning to the church for help. And so we got a phone call from one of our partners in the diocese. They said, "Thank you, we received the emergency support. We're going to use this to operate." But they asked the question, is your definition of operations being able to feed our employees? Because that's what we need to use this money for. And so they literally needed to use the first support from Catholic Extension to be able to just feed their employees. And so it's just incredible to hear all these stories coming in. In the Virgin Islands, Bishop Bavard tells the story of priests who are living in half-destroyed rectories right now. There's nowhere to go. If you're on the island, there's no place where you can be that really hasn't been hit by a hurricane, because they, of course, got hit not only by Hurricane Irma, but also Maria, leaving no one untouched. And so it's a real struggle for all of these places right now, and particularly in the Caribbean, where they lack power and basic infrastructure. And we're trying to be attentive to that reality, but also focused on listening to how we can help them rebuild and recover in the months and the years ahead.
And these are places that Catholic Extension has been for many years, and you've worked with them. Maybe if you could talk about some of the work that you do in these Caribbean places and these mission territories in Texas, for instance.
We have an enormous history and really a stake in these places that goes back 100 years. Catholic Extension has helped, between Texas and Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, we've helped build 3,200 churches just in those regions alone. And so we've got an incredible legacy there, not only of building churches to help create spaces where the faithful can come together, but we've also got a long history of helping support the basic operations of the church, helping support the priests' salaries, working in very poor and under-resourced mission chapels, supporting seminarian education and lay leadership formation. And I always tell people this, I love going to the Caribbean dioceses. There's a unique spark of life that's there, a unique experience of church that I think is very vibrant. And we see that even in the midst of this terrible tragedy of Hurricane Maria and Hurricane Irma, which impacted them so heavily. They have this spirit of resiliency and of coming together that is so powerful. I said this at our press conference with the bishops, that it's amazing that in the worst of times, you see the very best of the Catholic Church coming out. And that's exactly what we're seeing in places like the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico and Texas, where the Church has really become now the center of humanitarian support, delivering water and aid and food and clothing and diapers and all those important things. But most importantly, the Catholic Church is there to provide spiritual and pastoral care to people who are deeply suffering, and that's work that we're heavily involved in now with these dioceses.
Yeah, and you mentioned too, you're going to be there in the future too, and you're going to be there. Campaign now you're starting to develop for the hurricane-ravaged areas.
We are. We recently announced a multi-year, hopefully multi-million-dollar fundraising campaign. Because we know, again, that this is going to be a long road to recovery for all of these dioceses. Again, helping financially sustain them, but also help them rebuild some of the properties that have been damaged. And so this is actually going to be modeled on what we did following Hurricane Katrina, when there were multiple dioceses, Catholic dioceses across the Gulf Coast, who were heavily impacted by that storm. And Catholic Extension had put together a fundraising campaign between 2005 and 2010 that helped raise $10 million. And so that's kind of the benchmark that we're going with right now, and we're going to be working on this for the years to come.
Well, thank you, Joe, for being with us. And people can always go to the website.
They can, and at catholicextension.org, and any support would be most welcome.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. Thanks so much for talking.